in my 20 years of doing technology, I have never seen such a foundational change to the life of a developer that AI tooling is today bringing.
Thank you for coming in. I do really appreciate it and appreciate the time. High level, what's your story, through the industry?
First of all, pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me. It's a really interesting forum that you run, and glad to be sharing all these thoughts with your audience. So my story is roughly 20 years of career in engineering, starting with kind of being a hands-on developer, working through various financial institutions in the City of London, through banks and sell-side institutions. And then at some point in my life, with somewhere around 2016, I realized that I was really good at one thing, which was understanding what business wanted and then translating that to technology requirement. And suddenly that found quite a sounding board among a lot of people, in the sense that, hey, you could kind of act as this conduit between kind of trying to bridge the gap between technologists and business. So that led me to a career in engineering management and leading engineering teams. So for the past 7-8 years, that is what has been the most interesting part of my career. It's been leading diverse set of people across the globe, across geographies, into developing software, developing products that are impactful to business, that are impactful to kind of making things efficient, bringing in more money, being commercial and things like that, and being that efficient conduit between what the business really wants to focus and what technology can deliver.
So are you an engineer at heart and then just discovered a passion for the domain, or was that always kind of overtly there as well?
Yeah, and that's such an interesting question, because I see a lot of colleagues kind of struggle with that in terms of technologists are really good at writing code and engineering. And then for a lot of colleagues, it's a big step out to be thinking beyond that code editor and beyond that IDE. So for me, I think that is a very big step that people should be thinking about, in the sense that, yes, so I'm still an engineer at heart. I still code. I was literally coding an hour before I came to this forum. But at the same time, it's really also important to get a view into the wider pictures, and why are you doing this, as in what is going to be the impact of this? What is going to be the impact of if you get this wrong? And that is what led me to kind of step outside my code editor and think about, why do we write this piece of software, and what is it going to achieve? And then working with colleagues on the other side in the business and trying to understand their view of how this impacts their life.
And were you dealing predominantly, was it trading, or was it more operational? When you talk about the business, like what sort of stakeholders?
So I run the research engineering teams at JP Asset Management, and we bring all the alpha signals that our researchers produce, analyst colleagues produce across JP Asset Management into a platform. And that platform becomes available to all of our investment teams, or all of our portfolio managers who are actively looking at these signals to find the next investment idea. So that is predominantly my day job.
Yeah. And then did you always see yourself being a leader, or was that more organic? Was it, I guess, so engineer at heart and then developed a flair for being the conduit. Was it always part of your plan to evolve into then a leader of engineers, or did that just naturally kind of occur?
For me, it was quite organic, also quite opportunistic, as in I always found myself at junctures where there was an opportunity where I could step up and lead a team, or I could kind of help an organization with a strategy of locating some of their engineering talent in a different geographical location. So it came quite organically, quite naturally. But over the last 5 or 8 years, I've reflected a lot on leadership, because leadership is very different for engineers, because engineers are creative at heart. And with leadership, you need a lot of strategic outlook, a lot of commercial kind of aspects of leadership that don't naturally come until you kind of work on that aspects of your life, until you kind of consciously reflect of things that you're doing wrong and then developing and working towards it. So I wouldn't say it just came naturally. I was lucky to have the opportunity, but then I also did a lot of work in terms of where I needed to grow in terms of being a good leader.
Yeah. Did you have to sacrifice like some of the tech? Because obviously now you're splitting time between leadership and thinking quite strategically, where maybe from an engineering perspective you could be a little more creative. You mentioned also that like you were cutting code an hour ago before you came here. So is that something you have to craft for yourself, like that time, or is that something that's still expected of you by JP, that you are very much a technology first leader?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of both. But at the point that I am in my career, no, I wouldn't be expected to code at work, because there's my main priority would be to making sure the teams are delivering to what we've committed to and the stakeholders are happy. So for me, it's a conscious decision. I want to stay hands-on, and I think this is a very important point in my head that I talk to a lot of peers about, because as you move up the chain of an engineering career, it's natural that you've got a lot more responsibilities and you're spread quite wide. And to find time to sit down and code and focus when there's like 500 other fires running in the background, it's a really hard thing. But to me, I wanted to make a conscious effort that I carve that time out, maybe every 3 hours, every Friday, or at some point in my week that where I'm just literally coding. So I see the most effective skill set that people can have is a T-shaped skill set, essentially, where you're going wide as an engineering manager, engineering leader across a lot of aspects like stakeholder management, domain, delivery, prioritization. But then you're also going deep into one aspect which you are really passionate about, which comes to you naturally. For me, that was coding. For other colleagues, it could be writing research papers. But I often see people lose that depth in going wide, and it is natural because that's a product of time. When you're going wide, you don't get time to go deep into an aspect. But it's really important to stay close to your roots. And it doesn't need to be coding. Like, not all engineering leaders code. You could be writing a research paper, or you could be writing the next strategy paper.
Yeah. I think for some, I mean, this is for people that sort of see my post on LinkedIn, that concept of a T-shaped profile is really prevalent at the moment. And I guess for people that aren't coming from technology backgrounds, the proximity to tech and the basic ability to use technology is sort of maybe one part of the T, and then the other stuff is more domain centric. And then on the engineering side, you can still be an engineer, but like you've got to have an appreciation of the domain and what are the actual business like problems, what are the outcomes that we're looking for, as opposed to just like the most complex technical solution that we can build. And then how do you kind of be the conduit? How do you communicate? How do you transcend engineering, quant, trading, so that you can understand what is important to all of those different stakeholders? But I think one of the challenge, particularly looking at sell side, is some people haven't kept themselves close to the code, even if it was the passion and the thing that brought them to the dance, and they've tend to focus on the breadth of fires that they're trying to put out. The price that they're starting to pay a little bit, from what I see, is the market seems to be shifting into this. Well, you need the tech knowledge, and even for project management roles, BA roles that we would be hiring now, the prevalence placed on the tech is so much bigger than it used to be, where it's becoming the glue, which is a trend. And I guess some people are becoming more and more aware of it and wanting to get back to being, a little bit more hands-on. With your role now, how kind of overtly centered are you around AI? Because like that's a topic obviously that you're quite passionate about and is very much in vogue at the moment. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of hypotheticals. I'm interested in getting people's opinions that know more than me, and I think my user base are very interested in it as a topic, but it's mostly engineers. Is your remit at the moment like squared around AI, or is that just part of the bigger puzzle?
It's both, and to me, first, I think in my 20 years of doing technology, I have never seen such a foundational change to the life of a developer that AI tooling is today bringing. So this is quite unprecedented in that sense. The amount of impact that this tooling is having on the life of a developer, is foundational. So to me, it's not something that's just a buzzword and it's going to go away, but it is going to be a key skill that you as an engineer are going to have to develop and kind of actively work on to be employable in the market. Like you said, the market's really rough right now. And by the virtue of running a research platform, we get to do really cool things because a part of research is also using these data science and machine learning techniques to discover new investment signals. So it's a combination of both. So in my day job, I see AI, the impact of AI tremendously on both spheres, the stuff that we're doing for users in terms of discovering investment signals, but also the way the developer productivity and efficiency is improving due to this tooling. It's fascinating, this kind of stuff that you can now do with some of these tools.
You mentioned like this is the biggest fundamental shift for developers that you've seen. So can you give some examples of like either things that are already in or things that you think will be coming in terms of like how does that manifest in reality?
Sure. So for most engineers, it starts with, just like for a normal user, you would go to the browser, use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to write your question, and the AI will come back with an answer. For most developers, it starts with a tool called a Copilot. It could be a GitHub Copilot or some other product that you want to use that's within your editor, and that's just literally helping you write code. And this is nothing different because developers have been used to what we call autocomplete for a long time, for years now, that when you type something, the IDE completes it for you. This is just 1,000 times better when it's just going to write the next chunk of code for you, and you're just kind of giving it the oversight and trying to think through if it's the right thing to do. So that is how most developers will start. That's how I started using code. And it's amazing the amount of the way you have to change the application of your skill set as an engineer to what the IDE is doing, because suddenly you've got a very powerful tool. Previously, you were thinking through the next line of code, and now the thing has completed it for you. And then most developers very soon realize that they're still kind of constantly in a side chat window talking to this Copilot and asking it questions, and it's producing code. They're pasting it into their code editor and running it. It's producing some errors, and then they are putting it back into the Copilot. And it just gets a bit annoying from that cycle perspective. So at the extreme edge of this, what's happening with the industry is what's the agentic AI tools, where you literally just tell the tool, I want to develop this feature. Let's write an app that gets the latest stock quotes from Yahoo and give me the biggest movers. And it has the capabilities to write the code, run it, and then also test it out for you actively in a loop. And come back to you. So you as a human are just observing what the AI is doing, and it has actually done the whole job of writing the app and coming back to you. So at the extreme edge, that is what we are now experimenting with, which is a bit scary, but it's also exciting.
So on that basis, it seems like it's going to make developers like significantly more productive. How does that change the skills that they need to bring to the role versus say 5-10 years ago?
Yes, and that's a question that a lot of us have thought through quite a lot in the last few months or the last year, right? How does the life of a developer change with this tooling? And that change is significant in the terms of the efficiency it's bringing, not just that, but the mindset. Previously, when you were given a problem statement, open this code base and write this feature, you would go away, think through what you wanted to write, and then you would start coding it. This is now a completely different paradigm of thinking, in the sense that to me, it's a bit like when new managers start managing, right? And you've got this set of colleagues who are now you are responsible for. So the first instinct of an engineer is always to go and write code. But the favorite conversation I have with a lot of managers on my team is that the art of delegating. How do you not do the work, but think how do you get it done, and you offer the oversight, and you offer the right requirements. So this is a bit like that, where all engineers are now going to have to learn how do you delegate this to the Copilot. is this the best use of your time as an engineer? Or could the Copilot easily fix this broken test and you could be working on the next feature because that's a better use of your time. That's a better kind of return on the company's investment in you. So I think that mindset change is so fundamental and so far ingrained into the developer's day-to-day working that it's a bit hard to influence that change. And I think that is what most engineers are going to have to pick up fairly quickly to remain relevant in the market. Otherwise, there will always be other peers who will be good at using AI. They'll be much more efficient than you are, and you'd still be stuck in the old way of doing things.
So when you talk about like being able to spend time building new features as opposed to like working out why code hasn't passed a certain test or whatever, is that going to put the onus on the individual to understand a lot more about the user base or the domain specific elements that they work in, to know it's not going to be enough anymore to just be a really good coder and be plugged into the systems without understanding how the code is impacting the bigger picture?
Yeah, absolutely. And to do that, you do need to be a good coder and an engineer. Essentially, you need to understand the basics of how coding works and how technology works in order to be effective on how it can impact a larger change. But yes, you're right in the sense that developers will now be able to focus a lot more on that top tier task of, can I develop more features that help users versus kind of and leaving the mundane infrastructure tests, etc., to the AI. So that's how that change will impact.
Yeah. So to put your, I guess your leadership head on, when you think now about your own hiring and talent acquisition, how are you needing to accommodate for like where the next year or two is going to go in terms of how you assess talent in order to make sure that you're getting the right people through the door? Because I guess in theory, it's going to be harder to quantify like the skills needed or who the right person is, because a lot of it is still fairly hypothetical, and it's that bridge of like being creative and creating new things as opposed to just sort of BAU and fixing things.
Yeah. So for me, hiring has always been an interesting task. As in, yes, we need people who are really good technologists and really sound at understanding the basics of technology. But for me, I always love to focus on people who are more focused on action, on getting things done. As in, those qualities, to me, a lot of the technology qualities you can learn on the job. So those basics still remain same. How focused on solution is this person? Are they getting really bogged down by a certain set of complexity, or can they iterate through complexity and solve a particular issue? How good at communication are they going to be? Because that is going to be a key skill now that people are going to have, be it communicating with your AI co-pilot or be it communicating with your business colleagues. So to me, those fundamental qualities that we look in engineers and developers don't change, and that is what we'll still be looking for. What additionally I would say we would start looking for is how easy it is for this individual to change their mindset. How amenable are they to working in a different way in terms of, because you still find a lot of colleagues who are very set into that old no, I don't believe in any of this and I'm just going to focus on code.
Which is surprising to me, because I would assume that people that are in tech would understand how capable, and fundamental the kind of the new capacity is more than most. It's interesting you mentioned about communication. Like, this is something I've certainly talked about a lot, but I very much have framed it in my mind of like an ability to deal with non-technical users. But then the point you just made of also you need to learn and be effective in terms of communicating with tech, as in not technologists, but technology itself, and balancing a skill set whereby you can effectively communicate with both sides of the fence is not something I'd actually really thought about before, but it's actually probably one of the most important factors.
Absolutely. And increasingly so, a lot of people will have to develop into that role where you are constantly speaking to non-technical colleagues, trying to understand what they want to get done, and then trying to explain it to your co-pilot on how to get that done. So to me, none of the fundamentals of software development change here. So we don't even in our day jobs, we don't let the AI commit code directly to a production code base. So all you would let it do is write a piece of feature, create a PR, which you review and offer your oversight on. So all of that still remains. You'll still need senior engineers who understand code really well, code base really well, can think through, is this the right thing for the code base, or is it just going to create a massive monster that we won't be able to manage in the future? And then deal back with the AI and say, hey, can you break that function down into a smaller piece? Or I've already got this other piece of code that does this. Can you use that? So I think that skill is going to be an interesting thing to see how the community evolves to make better use of these tools.
It sounds to me like developers are going to have to create a BA skill set, or BAs are going to have to create a very highly technical querying ability to speak to Copilot and that sort of thing skill set. But potentially then that might be that as both of those merge, you may lose a layer of BAs, or you may lose a layer of developers where actually they'll just amalgamate into like a single role. But there does seem to be a concern in the technology world at the moment that this is going to cause a need for less developers, less engineers, less people, but those people will do a lot more. And then alternate point of views seem to speak to, actually, no, you'd keep the same amount of people because they can all do so much more. And you'd look at more creative and different use cases in order for them to add value, because there's going to be so much more bandwidth available. Do you have an opinion on like which side of the fence that might fall on?
Yeah, there's a very interesting piece of research/philosophy that people often kind of quote around this particular aspect of the AI tooling. It's called the Jevons paradox. And Jevons was an economist, philosopher in 1800s, I guess. And his hypothesis was, when the steam engines were getting really efficient, everyone thought, oh, we're not going to need coal anymore because these engines are so efficient now that the coal production is going to have to go really drastically down. And back then, that was a major source of people's income and revenue, etc. But what we noticed as steam engines became more efficient, we found more use of those engines, and coal production increased rather than going down. So we often quote the Jevons paradox in the sense that as this technology becomes more efficient, we'll find more application of it, and we'll need people who actually understand it better and who can use it to produce more. So the human appetite for growth and doing software product, I don't think that's going to go down. So to me, will people lose jobs? Yes, there will be some aspects where we will get more efficient. But to me, it'll be developers who can work with AI that will replace developers who can't work with AI. By quoting Jevons paradox, it'll be, you would find a lot more application of this technology, and you'll need a lot more people to be able to understand and apply this technology. So it is an interesting change in the cycle to see how developers cope with it. So not all developers will lose job is my belief. My belief is that developers who don't adapt quickly will be replaced, unfortunately, by developers who...
I guess like when everyone farmed the land manually and then a tractor turned up,
Yeah.
people just had bigger farms. Like farms just got a lot bigger than they historically would have been. And
Exactly.
even then you're governed by like physical land. Whereas in a digital world, actually the governance comes more from just your the lack of creativity or like viable new use cases that can be developed. And I guess paradoxically then the talent, the individuals that can be the conduit and can understand the how can we shape this to add value over here in a way that other people haven't thought about yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
They'll become the linchpin that pushes a company further, as opposed to, we don't need you anymore.
Yeah, exactly that. Another analogy people often cite is that of bank tellers and when ATMs came, everyone thought, oh, the bank teller job's now just going to go away completely. But as time progressed, we saw with ATMs coming in, there was a lot more application of banking technology, and banking grew, and you had this more massive institutions rather than ATMs replacing everything else. So I think it's exactly that. And to me, at the heart of this is the point that you raise around communication. So it's everyone will need to learn to be better at communication in terms of how do I communicate with AI or with colleagues or with each other.
It's a bit of a segue, but you mentioned about communication and the tech side, and this is completely off topic. But my brother-in-law is a model, and he is not necessarily a technical person. And we've had a few conversations about GPT and trying to sort of learn how to like communicate with GPT and use it. And he literally messaged me this morning. And he's basically bringing out his own men's like fragrance. He's got like tester samples coming to his house today, and the whole thing has been done with GPT. And he was sort of saying like, for me, this is something I've always wanted to do, but I never had an idea how to do it, and I couldn't do it, and it was not something that I would have done. And I've stood this up in a week, where now I've got a physical product at the end of it. And that's in like a real kind of layman, non-technical, not particularly nuanced individual. So I guess to go back to it, the concept of communication, he's using technology, he's learning to communicate with technology to create an outcome that's going to be a value add in his opinion. If you apply that into like the banking world, for example, where like you say, there's so many like myriad banking application and capability now, in theory, the engineers coming in and being that conduit, but that will become the pinch point now is being the conduit is the thing that's going to be important, and having those muscles and those reflexes as an engineer and being able to thrive in that sort of environment is probably going to be the biggest differentiator, as opposed to like the tech itself being a barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes, so I started my career really long ago, 20 years ago, when there was none of this tooling was advanced, and a lot of colleagues who are from that would remember something called Java docs, which used to be a huge reams of documentation that you would look at and understand, oh, how is this library going to work? And then you would write that code, right? And then the IDEs grew, and all of that was not required anymore, and the the editor would do it for you. And similarly, this is just that next phase in that evolution where you don't even need you just are talking to the editor and it's writing the code for yourself. So we've seen that happen multiple times in the life of a developer. This is just like the next phase of it.
Yeah. One sort of fairly obvious question that springs to mind to me is, stereotypically, investment banks or larger institutions are not particularly fast to turn in terms of innovation. And because of the size, they're quite vertically structured and siloed, where typically people don't have huge breadth in their roles. They need to be quite deep just by virtue of the organization. So for companies that are, investment banks, big four firms, larger companies in general, will they have to adopt structural shifts? So restructuring, not in a sense of like get rid of everyone, but need to restructure to allow that communication element to come to the fore. Because surely there's some people in an engineering team right now that would listen to you and say, yeah, for sure, Nirav, like communication is important, but because of my role and the parameters around it, I don't have the chance to communicate with the users. Like I don't see them.
And absolutely, and that is what we're seeing widely across the landscape as well, in the sense that not all engineering teams can as easily take up this tool set as I make it sound sitting on this chair, because a lot of engineering teams are really kind of restricted due to the nature of the applications that they run, be it a regulatory application where there's a reputational risk of getting something wrong, or a financially critical application where an error can cause a big loss. So not all teams will be able to kind of adapt as quickly to this revolution as some other teams where you're just doing a greenfield piece of small feature or a small app, and it's really easy for you to integrate this new tooling into it. So it'll be a combination of both, and there'll be a set of teams who will be able to adopt this really quickly because their applications let them do that, and then there'll be a set of teams who will have to slowly adapt to it in terms of there'll be a fairly long period, at least in my belief, where we will have a certain set of colleagues still working in that old paradigm because of the nature of their jobs.
Sort of thinking on the theme of like growth and onward trajectory and that sort of thing, like what does your next evolution look like? Do you want to go more into leadership and maybe lose a bit of the code, or would you want to centralize back down towards code? Like what are your thoughts on like the next iteration?
I would never want to stop coding, but that's just me. And again, to me, producing something, be it content, this podcast, or a PowerPoint presentation, or a Word document, or a piece of code, it's really important. A person's job should not be just managing teams, managing stakeholders, talking to people, going to meetings, which strangely enough, such a massive amount of people in this city seem to be doing. A person's job should really be about producing something.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, it could be anything that you are really good at, that you find really interesting. For me, it's coding. So no, I would never want to lose code to code, but I'm really fascinated by what technology can do for organizations. I sometimes still feel technology within an organization, the technology department is really underappreciated, naturally because technologists, leaders as well, are not great at communicating, and there's still often the business feeling, oh, we aren't getting a lot. So for me, that is what natural progression would be. How can I lead a department that's really impactful, that's delivering to what business wants, where business is not feeling, oh, that's the technology guys aren't doing what they're. So it's a couple of those things. And even if I don't get to code, I would like to remain fairly technical. And oftentimes when I have this view, a lot of the peers and colleagues do not agree to it, because your day job becomes so stressful and there's so many meetings that you are having. Nirav, how do you even code? And to me, I think it's really important to make a conscious effort, identify one project, identify one team that you feel is where you're going to be able to contribute the most in your organization, and start joining their daily stand-up meetings, scrum meetings. We make that conscious effort to get back into that habit.
Yeah,
is where, and it's not easy. It's not easy for me as well when you've got so many really senior business leaders asking you for why was that feature not delivered when you said it would be delivered, to then go and focus on coding.
Yeah. And I go back to it. Like, I think you being quite conscious of this is quite rare. I think not due to like people don't care or whatever, but particularly in finance, like once you're in and you're just on the hamster wheel of, like you say, just meetings and deadlines and meetings and deadlines, like it's hard to get out of just the cycle of just like deliver what's needed of the day and think about it from a slightly bigger perspective. And that's one thing that, you know, I'd love to come from this podcast for people is it's a chance for like guys like yourself to come in and talk about things like that. And maybe people to think, yeah, actually, I do need to consider these things a little bit more in terms of me being a little bit more strategic in terms of how I'm operating, or trying to carve out things that I know I'm not going to want to lose over time. There is a stereotype that I have, having never worked in a bank, that in a bank, progression typically just pushes you away. And there's a natural cap whereby if you want to stay technical, it's going to be hard to like break through a certain level from a scope and a comp perspective. And I had a conversation recently with a software engineer at another bank, and he said that he's very, very technical, and he sort of wanted to go down the distinguished engineer route. And the company offered that to him as an alternate to becoming a manager. But in theory, he said, look, it's a paper title. Like in reality, I have no scope and I have nothing more than I would have had as a senior developer. And as a result, he's looking to leave. And he's you know, very good, very capable. Do you think banks in particular, holistically speaking, in terms of like your networks and opinions that people give you and that sort of thing, do they do enough to facilitate providing growth for people that are technologists and want to stay fairly close to technology? Is that, what are your thoughts on that?
The mindset around this is rapidly changing. I'm not going to completely debunk that stereotype, because to a certain extent it is correct. And I think it's not just banks. us as a society, us as a organization, we've developed into this mindset of you can grow and be a CTO or a CIO only if you've got 500 people reporting to you. And if you're coding daily, then how do you have 500 people reporting to you? So I think that stereotype isn't completely wrong, but increasingly so, I see a lot of MDs, for example, at JP Morgan, they code. But when I say they code, that doesn't mean that they're contributing to the day-to-day projects or a feature, but they're coding on something that's a bit more strategic in the sense that here's a new technology, how can we apply to it? I'm going to do a small prototype and kind of then give it to my team to do it. So a lot of that mindset, that traditional mindset of can you grow if you are hands-on, is changing now. But at the same time, we've got a bit of journey in the industry to go through where that path of a distinguished engineer is more available to more colleagues, and not just to like some of the smartest inventors
and for it to mean something.
Yeah. And for it to mean, because right now the path of a distinguished engineers in most organizations is an exceptional thing that you do. As in, if someone's really exceptional, they go down that path of a distinguished engineer. But to me, it should more be norms. All engineering managers should be hands-on. Is the world I would want to see.
And it does seem to be shifting that way. And just like looking at like talent retention, it always strikes me as quite funny because the main reason we're headhunters, so we recruit by proactively approaching individuals that by and large are quite happy, and sort of trying to bring them opportunities that maybe are slightly better aligned. The most common reason that somebody would leave a company, an organization, is typically I'm being pushed away from the stuff that I enjoy in order to get more money or to get more scope. So my options are lose the passion, or stagnate from the metrics that the industry and society values. And obviously everyone wants financial progression, everyone wants more scope. And a lot of people seem to get caught in a pinch point where they want that stuff, but they don't want to have to fight to carve out an hour a day where they can write code. The industry does seem to be shifting around that, but it's happening very, very slowly. And oftentimes someone will quit and then they'll get offered it. Yeah, we can do that for you because someone doesn't, and then whether it materializes or not is another story. But that's the number one point. It's very rare people come and say like they're moving just because they think they're underpaid and they want more money, or it's never the overt kind of drivers that you might think. It's always like, I just don't see how I can progress here without giving up the stuff that I get that gets me out of bed in the morning. And that's difficult, I think, for engineers that work in larger organizations. I guess the question is like, how do those large organizations combat it in a way that enables, I mean, we're back to your point of the conduit and the communication, like that distinguished engineer effectively is going to be the skill set you mentioned. Talk to the tech, talk to the business, be able to bring them together, orchestrate solutions that add value. But like, there's probably some stuff that needs to change organizationally to make that an actual reality.
And not just organizational culture. I also see a lot of peers who are leading large engineering organizations. By the virtue of having grown up as an engineer, it's a bit of a spicy take. You're not the best manager of people because you are an engineer at heart. So I think that is a journey that you have to go personally on as well as an engineer leader. So for me, it took a lot of time to learn how to effectively delegate, develop that next level of managers in my organization, which then gives me the creative time some of my time to not constantly be battling fires, because I've got a team who can and do that, and then I can focus. So it's a bit of both. Organizations need to develop that culture and path for people, but senior engineering leaders also need to actively, consciously work on their skills of how do I become a better leader? How do I delegate more? How do I develop that next line of management whom I can rely on, trust on to execute something for me, and not having to constantly go in there. And then how do I use my skill set and capabilities and experience that I've got over so many years in more technically? So to me, it has been a combination of both. I've been fortunate to be part of organizations where that is appreciated and we've been given that platform you can code. And then also for me, it was a lot of work on myself to be able to get into that mindset.
And I guess to like almost play devil's advocate to my own point, if say they make those organizational structural changes and all of a sudden engineers can stay engineers, you're still going to need managers. But does that then create, say, 10 out of 10 tech management roles, now only 3 of them are staffed by previous engineers who wanted to be managers? Because as you mentioned, like most engineers don't. So then do you have people running engineering functions that have never been engineers? And is that possible? Could someone do an effective job if they've never had an appreciation of the engineering side in terms of leading engineering teams?
Yeah. My personal belief is no, in my experience, but I could be wrong. In my experience, to lead an engineering team, you need to have a very sound appreciation of the life of an engineer, what that person is facing day to day when they're trying to run that piece of code and it's just not running, or the build engine is just not building as they wanted it to build, and that's why it's taking them so much time. A person who hasn't been through that journey would not be able to appreciate it. But I'm sure there are great non-technical leaders leading engineering organizations, so I could be wrong. I personally would want to always have an appreciation of why my team is stuck at a certain point, and not constantly pressure them. Why is it not done?
Yeah.
I'm going to literally turn the tables and ask you, like, for other technologists who are listening to us today, what are your top 5 tips that you'd give them on what to do with their LinkedIns?
Yeah. So number 1, don't write it for your peers.
Don't write it for your peers.
So a lot of people write LinkedIn profiles to impress their peers and their colleagues, but they don't care. So it's not what it originally was. It's not a networking tool. You need to capture your LinkedIn profile as if it's a CV, but you need to write it in a different way because it's viewed in a different way and it has a different viewership. So the common mistakes that people make is firstly, they'll write it for their industry, but their industry aren't interested. The people that they need are recruiters, and that manifests now as people say the phone doesn't ring anymore. That's because before you got a mass email and you replied to it and someone phoned you, or they found you in a database and they thought that they did some keyword matching and they phoned you up. That doesn't really happen so much anymore. If you get proactively contacted by a recruitment company, it's probably like an in-mail through LinkedIn or someone messaging you through LinkedIn. So you need to write it for those people. And then the second tip would be you need to appreciate that those people know a fraction of a percentage about what you do versus what you do. So if you write it in a way that won't speak to a fairly technically ignorant recruiter, they might be looking at your profile, but they don't even know that you're relevant for the job that they're trying to hire for. So again, you don't get the outreach. So this is why I say you need to speak to recruiters, but also hiring managers. Your profile needs to be nuanced enough that it will impress somebody that maybe could become a future manager, but at the same time, simplistic enough that fairly dumb recruiters can look at it and go, I know what I'm looking at. And so it needs to strike a balance between simple terminology. And then I would also say the most important thing is to frame things around outcome. What have you worked on? What have you delivered? For who? Who were the stakeholders? How did you do it? Why was it important? In a way that doesn't give away anything that's, IP of the firm that you work for or whatever. And the whole industry now is centering less on skills. There's an assumption that tech is going to change so much in the next 2 years that the skills we hire you for today, you won't be using at that point anyway. You'll have a different skill set. So what we're now hiring for is your ability to influence and deliver outcomes. Can you understand the problems the business are trying to solve for? Do you understand why that's important? Can you conceptualize solutions? Can you build them and implement them? Can you take them to the next level? So the more a profile can capture that, who did you do it for? What did you do? How did you do it? Why? What was the result? Those are the people that are going to get the most amount of traction. And then the final point would be the biggest criticism people seem to have of recruiters, as I see it, is they get hit with really irrelevant approaches. So someone will message a C++ guy about a Java role or whatever, and they get very annoyed about it. My counter to that would be your profile doesn't make it clear what you're interested in or what you do. So you almost need to write it for the roles that you want to be contacted about. And if you don't want to be contacted about roles, you can then kind of change the profile and then strip it back, and then you're not going to get contacted again. But oftentimes it's good to be visible, because in my experience, the people that wait until they need a new job tend to make compromises on what that next job looks like, because they're not looking for the right job. They're just looking for a job that's like marginally better than the thing they're trying to get away from, or the thing they have to get away from. Best time to look for a job and to receive job approaches is when you're not looking for one. Because if you find one that's great and perfect and ticks the boxes, perfect, go. If you don't, you're already happy. So you've got nothing to lose. And again, that would be just engagement with the recruitment community, trying to identify who are good potential agencies, who has opportunities that, were I to be looking, I would consider relevant and interesting, and then build networks with those people to say, hey, I'm not looking right now, but when I am, this is the sort of stuff I'd be keen on. Can we keep in touch?
Yeah. And I think that is such a fascinating insight. That was a great 5 point. So thank you for that. I learned a lot.
Welcome.
But to me, I think 2 points really stood out, and I want to kind of dwell a bit on them. One is being outcome focused is so important, because when you start doing that, you naturally get kind of this, you stop obsessing about your current position. You just literally think, it goes back to my point on looking at everything as a project and as a step, as a ladder. So I think a lot of colleagues miss that out. So it's really important to, this is what I'm going to achieve with this project, and that is just a step, I think. And then the second thing that you said, the relationship between recruiters and hiring managers and recruiters and candidates, what I found almost always really helpful is I treat recruiters as my best friends, almost like as partners, and not seeing them as kind of
a pain.
I wouldn't describe it as a pain, but a middleman or a commercial agent who's just helping to introduce you to the hiring manager, and the other way around as well. Even some of the best recruiters I've worked with are the recruiters I've vibed really well with. Where we've not met in a meeting room, but we've met out for a coffee, and the person really gets it. And that comes when you start seeing the opposite person as a partner and like invest in that relationship, and not just go with that stereotype, in your words, I don't quote it, but dumb recruiter, because you really need to take that person through your understanding of what you're looking for, almost like a partnership, and then they'll perform best for you. So I think a lot of colleagues miss out on that, on networking in terms of seeing recruiters as a potential.
But look, I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much for coming in. It's been awesome. And I think we probably need to find a way to do it again.
Yes, likewise. I really enjoyed this chat, and I learned a lot as well. So thank you for that.
Well,
thank you for those insights.
Thank you. Cheers, Nirav.